Well, my friend Evan Sayed, a conservative comedian, wrote an amazing book called The Kindergarten of Eden. And in this, he talks about how the liberal mind works. It's an absolutely indispensable book for understanding some of the reasons, or at least the lack of reasons, for things that seem to be going on in our culture today. And when he was talking about progressives and being wrong about so many things, he mentioned the term that I liked very much. He said that they have rhetorical intelligence, that they're gifted with rhetorical intelligence. And I think probably it's that gift of rhetorical intelligence that drives them to progressive policies in the first place. But in any event, what he meant by that is they're extremely good at telling stories, and we're very, very bad at it. So what I wanted to do today was take an example of two things that seem completely unconnected and show how political messaging should work for conservatives in this country. So why don't we start with the example? The movie Crimson Tide is one of my favorite films ever, and I was watching it in the movie theater. I knew a fair amount of submarines by the time, and 15 minutes into the movie, I was not only hooked, I just said, I don't know who the technical advisor on this movie is, but he knows what he's doing. I think the technical advisor was a previous commander of USS Alabama. Crimson Tide is a story about a mutiny on board an American ballistic missile submarine. And for this story to work, there's one thing that the audience has to understand in the beginning. If they don't understand this, nothing else makes sense. And it's very simple. The story of Crimson Tide hinges around the fact that the captain wants to launch the missiles, the executive officer doesn't, and they have to agree. If that is not in the minds of the audience at the beginning of the movie, then everything that happens makes no sense whatsoever. The beautiful moral balance of Crimson Tide, the nuance of it, is predicated on this one instance, that the captain and the executive officer have to agree on something as, memorable as launching more destructive power than was unleashed in World War II. So what I want to do is I want to play a quick 2-minute scene from Crimson Tide. It's my favorite scene in the movie. It is one of my favorite scenes in all of movie making. But I want you to pay attention to a couple things here. I want you to listen very carefully to the language. And in just this one segment, beautifully acted, Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington. We'll come back to that in a minute. But I want you to pay close attention to the language and the stilted nature of the language. These are excellent actors, but it sounds like they're reading a script because they are reading a script. They're reading a script that concerns nuclear missile launch. So let's take a look at that scene, and then I'll come back and I'll tell you why this whole thing makes political sense.
I agree, the message is properly formatted.
Sir, we have a properly formatted emergency action message for weapon system readiness test, sir.
I concur, sir.
Where's the XO? Sir. Good of you to make it, Mr. Hunter. Get the authenticator. Get the authenticator.
Sir, request permission to authenticate.
Permission granted, authenticate.
Alpha, Alpha, Bravo, Echo, Charlie, Zulu, Tango.
Alpha, Alpha, Bravo, Echo, Charlie, Zulu, Tango.
Captain, message is authentic.
I concur, sir.
I agree. Message is authentic.
Sir, your captain's missile key.
Set condition 1, SQ for WSRT. This is the captain. This is an exercise.
Set condition 1SQ for WSRT. This is the XO. This is an exercise.
Captain, that fire in the galley could still flare.
Now's not the time. Make your depth 150 feet. All stop.
Make my depth 150 feet, all stop. Aye, sir.
Weapons con. Simulate pressurizing all tubes.
Weapons con. Simulate pressurizing all tubes.
Con, weapons. Simulate pressurizing all missiles.
Aye, sir.
Simulate pressurizing all missiles.
Simulate pressurizing all missiles, aye.
The reason I love this scene so much is because the entire movie hinges around it, but the scene itself makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, listen to the dialogue. What are they saying? He's got terms like set condition 1SQ throughout the ship for WSRT. What does that mean? The audience doesn't know what it means. And this is the point. The audience doesn't have to know what it means. Now, as it turns out, condition 1SQ is the state of a nuclear missile submarine when it's ready for ballistic missile launch. So set condition 1SQ throughout the ship is an indication that we're getting ready to launch ballistic missiles, and everybody go to their stations, get the ship at hover depth, and get ready to perform that particular activity. Set condition 1SQ throughout the ship for WSRT. WSRT is Weapon Systems Readiness Test. So once you understand what these terms mean, the scene makes sense. But the point is, you don't have to know what the terms mean in order for the scene to make sense. The reason I love this scene more than just about any other scene in movies, all of movies, is because it has the ring of truth. The screenwriter understood something that we need to understand. And here's what the screenwriter understood on Crimson Tide. He understood that it didn't matter if the audience didn't know what those terms were. It only mattered that they were important and that everything that was happening during that missile launch sequence was an extremely rigid, extremely precise set of instructions that happened by a pre-printed rule book. These are things that the men have trained on for years and years and years. That ambiguity that comes into the story later is the only reason why the mutiny makes sense in dramatic terms. So even though the audience doesn't understand what these terms mean, it doesn't matter. They sound right. Now, what I'm trying to say is, if that dialogue had been worse, if it had been, we've got the go codes, okay, everybody man battle stations, let's get ready to launch these birds, that kind of thing, the audience wouldn't have missed it. They wouldn't have known it was missing. But once it was there, it had the ring of truth to it. So what does this have to do with politics? Well, I read a story this morning that is actually good news for our side. And here it is. It's a link from Instapundit, but here's the story. Landslide, 80% support photo ID for voting, including 62% of Democrats and an overwhelming share of minorities. And here's a quote from the article. Given how often Democratic politicians equate laws tightening voting rules with Jim Crow, you might expect heavy support for voter ID laws among whites and only tepid support or even opposition among minorities. But you'd be wrong. Monmouth has whites split 77-21 and non-whites approaching unanimity at 84-13, 84% in favor of voting ID and 13 opposed. The same is true when we look at income, with a larger share of those who earn less than $50,000 per year in favor of voter ID, that's 81%, than those who make more than $100,000 a year, which is down to 76%, which is still an overwhelming majority. Opposing these laws isn't a winner even within Abrams' own coalition. It's a boutique issue for white woke liberals. I happened to see a commercial in front of one of these ads for YouTube where Stacey Abrams talked about the Republican Party is launching an unprecedented assault on voting rights, and they want this to be Jim Crow number 2 and all the rest of it. So now let's get down to the point. We tend to want to say that there are all kinds of rational reasons for voter ID, and of course there are. And some of us with a little more history, a little more background, know it's more powerful to say. It's funny you mention Jim Crow, Stacey, because Jim Crow was the result of Democratic politicians. Let's do a little history lesson, shall we, Stacey? The Republican Party formed in 1856 in order to abolish slavery. They were derided as the Black Republican Party. In 1856, they run John Fremont, loses a three-way election, but in 1860, Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, is elected. The South goes out of the Union before Lincoln comes into office, and essentially, when you get right down to it, the Confederacy was the Democratic Party leaving the United States of America so they could have their own country where they get to keep their slaves. In 1864, the election took place in the middle of the Civil War, bloodiest year of the Civil War. And in 1864, Lincoln was running to finish the war and abolish slavery, which was not his position when he started the war. The Democratic opponent was George McClellan, former general who'd been cashiered by Lincoln for just lethargy and slowness and unwillingness to attack the enemy. The Democratic candidate basically said, you know what, let's just call it a draw and go back to the old days when we had our slaves and everybody can be happy. After the Civil War, during Reconstruction, the KKK was a group of Democratic whites, Democratic Party whites, who were determined not to share voting rights with blacks. There were large numbers of massacres of blacks and Republicans, and the federal government occasionally had to take action to try and stop it. These were Democrats murdering both black and white Southerners because the black and white Southerners who were Republicans wanted equal rights for blacks. The first black representatives in the House of Representatives were 150 years ago. They were Republicans. They were black men elected right after the Civil War. After the Klan terrorization was finally suppressed, it was the Democrats that created the Jim Crow laws of segregation. When you see those pictures of people turning fire hoses on black students trying to go to college, the people who have sent them out, the governors who sent those National Guardsmen out and sent the attack dogs on the peaceful black protesters like Martin Luther King, they were Democrats. And we can do this all day. And this is not where we should be going. Because it's something that has to be learned. It's something that you have to be educated about. You have to read a fair amount of history to have it resonate with you. It's true, but saying those things doesn't have the ring of truth. In other words, just as in the movie script, if we talk about those things, it bounces off of people. What has the ring of truth to it? What is it that we can use in this story to have the same effect that they had in Crimson Tide? In Crimson Tide, that dialogue was there to tell you that this is an actual nuclear submarine that is about to commit an act of monumental, world-shattering importance, and every single step of this is very important, and the XO and the CO have to agree. That's what that scene is there for. What do we make of this story? 80% support voter ID, 82% among minorities. How do you handle this? Well, the way you handle this is you get to the truth of it. And the way you handle this is by asking simple questions that have the ring of truth. Why is it that you're going to court to make sure that nobody has voter IDs except for the recall election in California, where they're suing to make sure that every single signature on that recall ballot of the Democrat is certified and authentic? Why do you have that conflicting set of lawsuits going? What is it that you're afraid of? We would be delighted if it turned out that the voter rolls were accurate and that the people who were voting were legitimate, legal voters. And so we have to ask ourselves, why does this scare you so much? What is it about this that bothers you? Surely you want to prevent cheating, don't you? Because if you don't, then what you're saying is, you need to cheat to win. We don't feel that way. Make us happy as could be to find out that everything's in cushy shape. You assure us that it is. So this should be an opportunity for you to rub this in our noses. Why are you putting up this fight? Judo, the martial art of judo, was designed for small people, Asians, to defeat larger people, more people who were stronger than they were. And the entire idea of judo is to use your opponent's strength and mass against him. Instead of standing up to a bigger opponent and stopping him, you get out of his way and you apply just a tiny bit of force and you knock him down to the canvas. And you're using your opponent's strength against him. So if we're going to apply judo to things like all of these audits of the voting irregularities during the 2020 election, instead of saying there was cheating no, what we should do is we should say, listen, there's a bunch of stuff that we think is irregular, and we'd just like to put it to rest, just like you. Just like you, we'd like everybody to have confidence in this new president. And just like you, we want to know for sure. But there is a large number of people that have some concerns. So in the interest of putting those concerns to rest and having a country that's unified behind the president, why don't we just simply do these audits? You've assured us that everything is completely intact and there's nothing to worry about. And so we would just like to see the confirmation of that so we can tell the people out there who are running these crazy conspiracy theories about cheating why they're wrong. So since we have the same goals here, let's get down to it. And then they're stuck, you see, because if you do that to them, you have gone to them with the ring of truth. We want fair elections, don't you? Yeah, super. Then let's just do these simple steps here, and both you and I can both be assured of the fact that the American electoral system is, as you say, absolutely secure, absolutely ironclad, no chance of voter fraud whatsoever. This is your assertion. Now's your chance to prove it. Not just to prove it, now's your chance to win a big victory over all the people who you say are crazy. Should be a simple matter for you to dismiss these claims. So let's just bring them up in public. That way you can dismiss them as easily as you assure us that you can, and we can all rally behind this new president. It may not sound like a big difference, but it is. It's a fundamental difference. It's a fundamental shift in the momentum of the narrative. In other words, we are so busy trying to fight against the narrative that we continually lose because of the power and the multitude of the megaphones that are preaching the narrative. And the way to defeat this false narrative is not to say it's a false narrative. The way to defeat the false narrative is to treat it as if it's true. This is the simple thing that we just don't seem to be able to do. We have a majority here that is overwhelming. In round numbers, 4 out of 5 Americans of all races, of all ethnic backgrounds, of all religious backgrounds, with the exception of class, the richer liberals are more against it than the poorer working class Democrats are. But 4 out of 5 is not a close call. With a 4 out of 5 national majority for voter ID, our voting system problems should be very simple to solve because we have the enormous bulk of the American people behind us. So why can't we get this Leviathan awake? We can't get it awake because we don't know how to speak to it. We don't know how to talk to it. We're clanging bells and we're doing all these things trying to fight against the narrative. We should get out of the narrative's way and simply grant them their premise. No, you assure us that the voting in Georgia is absolutely 100% authentic. Terrific. That would be a great thing for the country. You have no idea how relieved I would be. And by the way, let me just say one thing here. I'm utterly convinced that this fraud occurred in 7 or 8 states. Utterly. But, and I mean this genuinely, if I could be proven wrong about this, if it could be proven to my satisfaction that there was no voter fraud of any systemic or significant thing, nothing that would have affected the elections, if it turned out that all these audits were revealing nothing, and I'd been wrong about the whole thing, I would be enormously relieved by that. I really would. Then I would think, okay, well, the American people made a choice that maybe wasn't so smart, but I wouldn't think that, wow, has our entire ability to choose been stolen from us now? Is that where we are? I'd be delighted if it turned out that there was no evidence of voter fraud. And this is the ring of truth. Basically, what you say is, what are you so afraid of? What are you so afraid of? We want to prevent cheating, and you want to prevent cheating, right? Right?